Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the old fat pig we have to put up with. The words hit me like ice water, standing there in my emerald green dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. I watched Bradley's new bride, Sophia, gesture toward me with a champagne flute while her wealthy family erupted in laughter. Then her father's face went white as fresh snow. Wait, aren't you Margaret Harrison, my new boss at Harrison Industries? Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I ended up being called a pig at my own son's wedding, the wedding I'd paid for entirely, down to the last rose petal. 2 hours earlier, I'd been adjusting Bradley's bow tie in the church vestry, proud as any mother could be. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I know the wedding cost a fortune, $300,000 to be exact. Not that I was counting. I'd watched him fidget with his cufflinks, the ones his father wore at our wedding 32 years ago, before cancer took him when Bradley was 12. "Your father would be so proud," I whispered, straightening his shoulders. But as I stood in that reception hall, listening to my son's new in-laws mock me openly, I realized pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. The Harrison family owned half the commercial real estate in Chicago. James Harrison, Sophia's father, controlled a business empire worth billions. What he didn't know was that his company's board had voted me in as CEO exactly 1 week ago. My first official day was Monday morning. "Mrs. Harrison?" James stammered, his champagne glass trembling slightly. I had no idea. Sophia never mentioned. "Mentioned what, Daddy?" Sophia's voice was sharp with confusion. She looked between us, her perfect smile faltering. "That Bradley's mother is Margaret Harrison." The silence spread like spilled wine across white linen. Sophia's mother, Patricia, stepped forward with the kind of smile wealthy women perfect in finishing school. "Oh my goodness, what a delightful coincidence. You share the same last name as my husband's company." "Not a coincidence," I said calmly, watching James's face cycle through several shades of pale. "I kept my married name after my husband died. Harrison Industries was his family's business. I inherited his shares when he passed. The math was simple enough, even for people distracted by champagne. Controlling interest, voting power, the ability to hire and fire anyone I pleased." Sophia's laughter died completely. "You're saying you own Daddy's company?" "Not own, dear. Control." I smiled the same smile I'd used in 100 board meetings. "There's a difference." Bradley appeared at my elbow, finally sensing the tension. "Mom, is everything okay?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised alone after losing his father, who'd worked 2 jobs to put through business school, who'd sacrificed everything to give him every opportunity, and realized he'd positioned himself slightly closer to his new wife than to me. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," I said, patting his arm. "I was just getting acquainted with your new family." James cleared his throat, his business instincts finally kicking in. "Mrs. Harrison, perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week. I'd love to discuss—" "Monday morning," I interrupted smoothly. 9 o'clock sharp. My assistant will send you the address." I turned to Sophia with my warmest smile. "Congratulations on your marriage." "Dear, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." As I walked away, I heard Sophia hiss to her mother, "Why didn't you tell me she was somebody important?" "We didn't know," Patricia whispered back frantically. "Your father said Bradley's mother was just some middle-class widow." "Just some middle-class widow." The words followed me to the ladies' room, where I locked the door and stared at my reflection. My dress was elegant, my jewelry modest but real, my makeup perfect despite the emotional earthquake I'd just experienced. In the mirror, I saw a woman who'd spent 30 years building a business empire in her husband's memory. A woman who'd raised a son alone, paid for his education, his apartment, his car, and now his wedding. A woman who'd been called a pig by people who didn't realize she could destroy their entire world with a single phone call. But most importantly, I saw a woman who was just beginning to understand her own power. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Board meeting moved to Tuesday. Emergency HR situation requires immediate attention Monday." I smiled at my reflection and began reapplying my lipstick. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. The path to that humiliating moment had started 18 months earlier, when I'd made the mistake of being too generous with my son's happiness. Bradley had called on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant he needed something expensive. "Mom, I've got incredible news." Sophia said yes. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, but I set everything aside. My son was engaged. Despite everything else, the mother in me was genuinely thrilled. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. When did you propose?" "Last night at Aurelio's. You know, that fancy place downtown where you took me for my graduation dinner." I remembered. The bill had been $400 for 2 people. But seeing Bradley's face that night, so proud of his MBA, had made every penny worth it. "Tell me everything," I said, settling back in my chair. For the next hour, Bradley described the proposal, the ring, which cost more than most people's cars, and Sophia's reaction. What he didn't mention was how they planned to pay for a wedding. That conversation came a month later. "The thing is, Mom," Bradley said, his fingers drumming against my kitchen table, "Sophia's family has certain expectations." I poured him more coffee, noting how he avoided eye contact. After raising him alone, I knew all his tells. "What kind of expectations?" "Well, her sister's wedding was at the Four Seasons, 300 guests, very elegant affair. I'm sure it was beautiful. And her cousin got married at the Drake Hotel. Sophia's been dreaming of something similar since she was a little girl." I waited. In business, silence was often the most powerful negotiation tool. "The venues she's looking at are around $200,000, he said quickly. "Just for the basics, not including flowers, music, photography, all the other things." $200,000, I repeated calmly. "I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, she's the one. I want to give her everything she deserves." "What about what you deserve?" I thought. "What about what I deserve after sacrificing everything for your happiness?" But I looked at my son's face, so hopeful, so young despite being 31 years old, and I felt the familiar tug of maternal love overriding common sense. "Have you talked to Sophia about a smaller wedding?" "You don't understand. Her family, they're wealthy, Mom. Really wealthy. Her father owns Harrison Industries." The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had no idea that I'd been quietly acquiring shares in James Harrison's company for years, building toward the controlling interest my husband had always dreamed of securing. "And you feel pressure to match their lifestyle?" "I want to be worthy of her," he said simply. Those 6 words broke my heart. I'd raised this boy to believe he was worthy of anything, anyone. How had I failed so completely that he thought love required a price tag? "Bradley, if she loves you, a courthouse ceremony would be enough." "Mom, please, I'm not asking you to pay for everything. Just help us get started. I'll pay you back once my career takes off." His career. Bradley had graduated with his MBA a year earlier and was working at a mid-level consulting firm, making decent money but nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to through Sophia's family. How much help are we talking about? Maybe $250,000? $300 at most? $300,000. The number sat between us like an unwelcome dinner guest. "Bradley, that's more money than most people make in 5 years." "I know, but you can afford it, right? The business is doing well. And after Dad's life insurance." He trailed off, realizing how callous that sounded. My husband's death had indeed left me financially comfortable, but hearing my son calculate the value of his father's life so casually made me feel sick. "Let me think about it," I said. That night I sat in my husband's study, looking at his photograph on the desk. We'd built Harrison Industries together, starting with a single small office building and growing it into one of Chicago's premier commercial real estate companies. After he died, I'd continued expanding, making strategic acquisitions, building the empire he'd envisioned. "What would you do?" I asked his picture. But I already knew the answer. Robert had always been too generous with Bradley, unable to deny him anything. It was one of the few areas where we disagreed. The next morning, I called Bradley and told him yes. Looking back now, standing in that bathroom mirror after being called a pig by my son's new in-laws, I realized that single word, yes, had been the beginning of my transformation from doting mother into something far more dangerous. Because by Monday morning, I would be their new boss. And unlike my son, they were about to learn that my generosity had limits. Monday morning arrived with Chicago's typical autumn chill, and I dressed accordingly: power suit, Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in the style that had intimidated corporate America for the past 20 years. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into the Harrison Industries boardroom, where James Harrison sat fidgeting with his phone like a nervous teenager. "Mrs. Harrison," he stood quickly, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet so early." "Mr. Harrison," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the conference table that was rightfully mine. "Though I think we need to clarify something before we begin." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing the stock certificates, board resolutions, and legal documentation that proved my controlling interest in his family's company. As of last Monday, I own 51% of Harrison Industries, which means this is my boardroom, and you work for me. James's face cycled through several emotions before settling on barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Harrison, I think there's been some misunderstanding. This company has been in my family for 3 generations. Built on land and initial capital provided by my husband's grandfather in 1952, I corrected calmly. Your grandfather was the junior partner, Mr. Harrison. The contracts are quite clear." I slid a manila envelope across the polished table. Inside were photocopies of the original partnership agreements, documents I'd spent years tracking down through legal archives and private collections. "Your family managed the business beautifully while maintaining minority ownership. But when my husband died, his shares passed to me. I've spent the last 15 years quietly purchasing additional stock whenever it became available." "This is impossible," James whispered. But his hands shook as he flipped through the paperwork. "The impossible part," I said, allowing a small smile, "is that you didn't notice. Your own board approved my appointments to key positions. Your CFO reports directly to me. Your legal team answers my calls." James looked up with something approaching horror. "What do you want?" "First, I want an apology for your daughter's behavior at the wedding reception. Sophia can be spirited. She didn't mean anything by those comments. She called me a pig, Mr. Harrison, in front of 200 guests, including my son. She's young. She's 28 years old and married to my son. Old enough to understand consequences." I leaned forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. Sophia will call me today and apologize sincerely for her behavior. Not because you told her to, but because she understands that respect isn't optional in this family." James nodded quickly. "Of course. I'll speak with her immediately. Second, we're going to restructure this company's employee benefits program. I've reviewed your current policies, and they're embarrassingly inadequate for a business of this size." This was actually true. Harrison Industries employed over 300 people, but their health insurance was mediocre and their retirement plan was nearly non-existent. "The improvements will cost approximately $2 million annually," I continued. "Consider it my contribution to social responsibility." $2 million? James's voice cracked slightly. "You can afford it. I've seen your profit margins." I pulled out another folder, this one containing detailed financial analysis I'd commissioned months earlier. Every expense, every revenue stream, every hidden asset the company possessed. Third, your son-in-law Bradley will be receiving a promotion to senior associate with appropriate salary adjustment. He's actually quite bright when he applies himself. I didn't realize Bradley worked here. He doesn't. Yet. I smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. His first day is Wednesday. James stared at me like I'd just declared myself Queen of Illinois. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to discuss these changes with my staff, my attorneys." "Your attorneys already reviewed everything last week. They're very thorough." I stood, closing my briefcase with a decisive snap. "The employee benefits announcement will be made Thursday. Sophia's apology will happen today. Bradley's promotion will be effective immediately." I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "Oh, and Mr. Harrison, in the future, when your family gathers to discuss the middle-class widow your daughter married into, you might want to mention that said widow now controls your family's primary source of income." James's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Have a lovely day," I said cheerfully, and walked out into my new corporate empire. By noon, my assistant had fielded 6 phone calls from various Harrison family members, 3 from their family attorney, and 1 very panicked voicemail from Sophia herself. "Mrs. Harrison, this is Sophia, Bradley's wife. My father explained that there's been some sort of misunderstanding about the company, and I wanted to call and, well, I hope we can discuss things like family. I listened to the message twice, noting the careful way she avoided mentioning the pig comment or offering any actual apology. At 2 p.m. she called again. This time her voice was noticeably shakier. Mrs. Harrison, I realize my comments at the reception may have been inappropriate. I was nervous meeting Bradley's family, and sometimes I say things without thinking. I hope you can understand. Still no real apology. Still positioning herself as the victim. The third call came at 4:30 p.m. Mrs. Harrison, please call me back. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd really like to make this right. Bradley is upset. My father is having some kind of crisis. And I just want to understand what's happening. I deleted all 3 messages without returning her calls. Tuesday morning, James Harrison appeared at my office door at 8 a.m. sharp, looking like he hadn't slept. Mrs. Harrison, please. Sophia is beside herself. She's young and made a mistake. Surely we can work this out as reasonable people? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Mr. Harrison, let me explain something about reasonable behavior. When someone pays for your daughter's entire wedding, venue, food, flowers, music, photography, reasonable behavior would be gratitude, or at minimum, basic courtesy. You paid for the wedding? Every penny. $312,000. I pulled out the receipts I'd requested from Bradley the night before. Would you like to see the invoices? James stared at the papers spread across my desk, his face growing paler with each line item. She had no idea, he whispered. No, she didn't. Because your family makes assumptions about people without bothering to learn the facts. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago, watching the morning traffic crawl through the streets below. But here's what I find most interesting, Mr. Harrison. Your daughter can afford to mock the woman who paid for her wedding because she knows her family has money. She can afford to be cruel because she's never faced consequences for her actions. I turned back to him with a smile that would have made sharks nervous. That's about to change. By Thursday afternoon, the employee benefits announcement had sent shockwaves through Harrison Industries that reached far beyond the office walls. Word spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit business community. Margaret Harrison wasn't just the new CEO, she was the new sheriff, and she was making changes. The first sign that my message was being received came Wednesday evening when Bradley called, his voice tight with confusion and something that might have been fear. Mom, Sophia's father offered me a job today. Senior associate, starting salary, $90,000 plus benefits. It's a great opportunity, but it feels weird, like charity. And Sophia's been acting strange since the wedding. She won't tell me what's wrong, just keeps asking questions about our family's finances. I smiled into my phone. Did you take the job? Well, yes. I mean, it's double what I was making at the consulting firm. But Mom, did you have something to do with this? Bradley, you're a bright young man with an MBA and strong analytical skills. Perhaps Mr. Harrison simply recognized your potential. Right, he said, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying it. Mom, is there something you're not telling me about the Harrison family? Why don't you ask your wife? She might have some insights. The second sign came Thursday morning when my assistant informed me that Mrs. Patricia Harrison, Sophia's mother, had requested a lunch meeting. The woman who'd stood silently by while her daughter called me a pig now wanted to chat over salads. Tell her I'm available tomorrow at noon. The Chicago Club, private dining room. Friday arrived gray and drizzly, perfectly matching my mood as I sat in the elegant dining room waiting for Patricia Harrison to make her entrance. She arrived precisely on time, dressed in the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive without being flashy. Margaret, she said warmly, as if we were old friends. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet. I've been simply dying to get to know you better. Patricia, I gestured to the chair across from me. How lovely to see you again. She settled herself with the practiced grace of a woman who'd attended 1,000 similar lunches, then spent several minutes discussing the weather, the restaurant's reputation, and other meaningless pleasantries. Finally, she got to the point. Margaret, I want to address what happened at the wedding reception. Sophia can be impulsive when she's nervous. She was overwhelmed by the day, and I'm afraid she spoke without thinking. Impulsive, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? She's mortified by her behavior. Absolutely mortified. She wanted to call and apologize personally, but she's been so worried about making things worse. I sipped my water, watching Patricia's carefully constructed composure. And yet, she's called my office 3 times without actually apologizing. Patricia's smile flickered slightly. I think she's intimidated by your success. James explained that you've built quite an impressive business empire. My husband and I built it together. I've simply continued his vision. Of course. And speaking of vision, I understand you've made some wonderful changes at Harrison Industries. The employee benefits improvements are so generous. Here it comes, I thought, the real reason for this lunch. James is thrilled to have someone with your expertise overseeing operations, Patricia continued. Though I confess, we're a bit concerned about the financial impact of such extensive changes so quickly. Are you questioning my business decisions? Patricia? Oh no, not at all. It's just that James has always run the company conservatively, and sudden large expenditures make him nervous. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Patricia, let me ask you something. What do you know about my son? The question clearly caught her off guard. Bradley? He seems like a lovely young man, very devoted to Sophia. He is devoted to her, perhaps too devoted. Bradley spent his entire savings account on your daughter's engagement ring, borrowed money for the wedding suit, and when that wasn't enough to meet your family's standards, he came to me. Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. $300,000, Patricia. That's how much your daughter's perfect wedding cost. Not your family's money, not even Bradley's money. Mine. The color drained from Patricia's face. I had no idea. No, you didn't. Because your family assumes that anyone who doesn't flaunt wealth must not have any. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. But here's what I find most interesting about your family's finances, Patricia. I've done some research. I pulled out a slim folder and placed it on the table between us. Your husband's company shows impressive revenue, but when you factor in debt service, overhead and operating expenses, the actual profit margins are quite thin. The Harrison family lifestyle is largely maintained through corporate credit lines and real estate leverage. Patricia stared at the folder like it contained a live snake. In other words, your family's wealth is mostly theoretical. Beautiful on paper, but highly vulnerable to market fluctuations or changes in corporate leadership. What are you saying? I'm saying that I could fire your husband tomorrow and replace him with someone who actually understands modern business practices. I could restructure the company's debt obligations. I could sell off assets your family considers untouchable. I smiled pleasantly while Patricia's world crumbled behind her eyes. Or, I continued, your daughter can call me tonight and offer a genuine apology for her behavior at the wedding reception. Not because she's intimidated or embarrassed, but because she understands that calling someone a pig is unacceptable regardless of their perceived social status. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. And if she apologizes? Then we're family, and I take care of family. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. But Patricia, understand this. I'm not some middle-class widow who can be dismissed or mocked. I'm the woman who now controls your family's future. I picked up the check that had been discreetly placed on the table. Lunch is on me. Please give Sophia my regards. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Patricia fumbling with her phone, already dialing her daughter's number. My own phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. James Harrison requesting full financial review of recent policy changes. I smiled as I stepped into the Chicago drizzle. Let them call their meetings. By Monday, I'd be ready with surprises they couldn't possibly anticipate. After all, I was just getting started. Sophia's call came at 9:47 p.m. that Friday night, just as I was settling into my leather armchair with a glass of wine and my husband's favorite book of poetry. Her voice was different this time, smaller, stripped of the entitled confidence that had carried her through our previous encounters. Mrs. Harrison, this is Sophia. I know it's late, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow. Good evening, Sophia. I owe you an apology, a real one, not the half-hearted attempts I've been making all week. She took a shaky breath. What I said at the reception was cruel and inexcusable. Calling you a pig was wrong, no matter what I was feeling or thinking. You paid for our entire wedding, and I repaid your generosity with insults and humiliation. I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. I've been thinking about why I said it, and I think I was scared. Bradley talks about you constantly, how strong you are, how successful, how you raised him alone after his father died. I felt like I could never measure up to the mother he describes. Interesting. This was more honest than I'd expected. So when I saw you at the reception, I saw this elegant, poised woman, and I felt inadequate, small, and instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I lashed out to make myself feel bigger by making you smaller. And how did that work out for you? I asked quietly. It didn't. It backfired spectacularly, and now I've hurt the person I should have been thanking. Her voice broke slightly. Mrs. Harrison, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I want to be the kind of wife Bradley deserves, and the kind of daughter-in-law you deserve. I took a slow sip of wine, considering her words. There was something in her tone that suggested genuine remorse, though it might have been motivated more by fear than actual understanding. Sophia, thank you for calling. I appreciate your honesty about your motivations. Does this mean, can we start over? We can try, I said carefully, but understand that trust is rebuilt through actions, not just words. Yes, absolutely. Whatever I need to do to make this right, I'll give that some thought. In the meantime, I have one question for you. Anything. At the reception, when you introduced me to your family, you clearly believed you were speaking to people who shared your opinion of me, which means this wasn't a spontaneous insult. It was a planned humiliation. Silence stretched between us for nearly 10 seconds. Yes, she whispered. I had told them beforehand that Bradley's mother was difficult, that she was always interfering and trying to insert herself into our relationship. But I've met you exactly twice before the wedding, both times at family dinners Bradley organized. We've spoken for perhaps 20 minutes total. I know. I was repeating what Bradley had said. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son had been complaining about me to his fiancée, painting me as some kind of meddling mother-in-law before I'd even met her family. What specifically did Bradley tell you about me? He said you had trouble letting go, that you still treated him like a child, that you used money to maintain control over his life. Her voice was barely audible. He said you'd probably try to take over the wedding planning and that I should be firm about boundaries. I closed my eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. The son I'd raised, supported, and sacrificed for had been systematically undermining me to justify accepting my financial support while rejecting my emotional presence. Sophia, thank you for your honesty. That took courage. Mrs. Harrison, I realize now that everything he told me was wrong. You're not controlling. You're generous. You're not interfering. You're loving. I should have formed my own opinion instead of accepting his characterization. Yes, you should have. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. But Bradley is my son, and his opinion matters most in this situation. He loves you, Sophia said quickly. He really does. I think he's just confused about how to be grateful without feeling guilty about accepting so much help. Perhaps. We'll see. After ending the call, I sat in my husband's study, surrounded by his books and photographs, trying to reconcile the son I thought I knew with the man who apparently saw me as a burden to be managed. Robert's voice seemed to whisper from the shadows. You gave him everything he wanted instead of teaching him to want what he could earn. My phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Mom, Sophia said she talked to you tonight. I hope we can all have dinner soon and work things out. I hate that there's tension in the family. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. We definitely need to talk. Soon.